saying when you're counting 40 SLPs, are any of those outside contractors?
No.
Is there,
Well,
because they were not.
so you and I can, so we'll meet on a normal labor meeting, and I'll have Kathy Shields
That'd be great.
nail these numbers down and tell me exactly what it is that she used in calculating them. But on the surface, it appears that would probably be the difference.
Yeah,
You know,
because I have
it's
16
actual
fewer
positions
SLPs,
versus
14.
filled positions. So anyway, I guess that wasn't the official start of the session. So welcome. How are you guys doing? That was a follow-up for everyone in the room. That was a follow-up to a question that was asked about where we stood
for ESC service provider supplement, the mouthful. Yes.
Right. So welcome, and we appreciate having you guys here today. With regard to today's session, we expect that this session to be a sort of an abbreviated session with a 2:30 sort of drop, hard stop. We in terms of the discussed topics today, we want to, we've got, did you already pass these out?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Anyone else need an agenda?
So LCTA wanted to discuss Article 8 and Article 10 that has been presented, and sort of we've responded, but I think that you guys want to have some more conversation. We're open to having more conversation around that and hearing what you have to say, for sure. I know that there was some concern last time that we were just, sort of not looking real in depth at the proposals, and that we were just sort of saying no current contract language. And I can say that while it may appear to be that we're not considering that stuff, it's just the proposal. We really felt like, when you talk about the associated costs that come along with a lot of what was proposed within the language, that those costs far exceed the amount that we have on hand to be able to implement it. Right. We've tried to prioritize what we consider to be a very fair financial package this year for teachers. That at this point, the good thing is our TISA went up by $500,000. So we anticipate that what was a $6.1 million offer goes up, right, with the TISA increase. So we're a lot closer than we had anticipated on that front. We're still trying to nail down exactly where we stand. We'll be able to come back with you guys the next time we meet and sort of update our offer with the new TISA numbers. So we're not going to talk an awful lot about compensation today. Just wanted to revisit 8 and 10 with you guys. You guys can lead the way on that. We'll respond as best we can to the concerns. Then we'll be presenting 13 and 26 today that specifically relate to evaluations. And then other than that, we can, if there's any outstanding issues that I want to talk about, we'll go from there. So do you want to start with 8 and 10?
Sure. I don't know if you have a list for 10 for cameras. So I think I think the idea was that last time 10 was introduced at the end. We just kind of went through it very quickly. But so I'll just go through it from the beginning and state our intentions then. So for A, employees shall be notified no less than 10 working days in advance when video cameras or other recording equipment is installed in a workplace. We just think as professionals, it's reasonable to not be recorded at all times. If it's going to be happening, of course, they need to be notified about that. And as we understand, there are currently cameras in a lot of classrooms, which I'll jump to H and say that's the purpose of that language, is that if we're starting the school year and teachers already have the cameras in the classroom, we want them to be notified within 3 working days they're being recorded. All right, jumping back up to B, video cameras or recording equipment will not be placed in restrooms, staff, faculty lounges, or areas dedicated to planning. I think restrooms are pretty standard. Also, to give teachers some semblance of professional privacy, if they're hanging out staff, faculty lounges, they may not even be on duty. We're not sure that needs to be surveilled by cameras. We're also saying they should not include any sound or audio recording. The sign indicating the facility has video cameras or recording equipment shall be placed at the main entrance to the facility and each room that contains a recording device. So all of this is about notice, essentially, letting employees know there's a camera here, you're on it, you're being subject to recording. For E, no disciplinary action shall be taken nor adverse evaluation made against an employee based upon photographs or any recordings by cell phones, tapes, or any other recording devices. Furthermore, the existence of any such material which comes to the attention of an administrator shall be disclosed to the employee prior to proceeding with the district investigation. And so the merit of this is that if a principal is seeing a teacher come up to a minute late a couple days of the week, we don't think anything needs to really come about that, just based on that, if there's not any problems. And that if the district is going to now investigate some kind of chronic tardiness, that the site administrator first would need to disclose this recording even existed. And I don't think you guys are trying to use it like this, is my understanding, right? It's for security. So, and I mean, this is not in here, but part of what I've been thinking is, do principals even need access unless there's a security issue? Because I understand that, head security, they're monitoring all kinds of stuff. But in terms of serious security issues where cameras are being used materially, how often is that even happening in this district? Where a principal is like, oh yeah, pull the tape, I guess is my question. Is that happening?
There are some instances where we're pulling the tape, and most times it's because it's in these ESE classrooms where you have behavioral issues, and what we've done in the past is there's been an allegation from a parent that that something occurred, and in pretty much every case, save a couple, that tape has actually been the saving grace for the teacher. The fact is that the parent or the student is claiming that the teacher put hands on the student, or gripped the student too hard or something along those lines, and the tape showed that was not the case. And in some cases, admittedly, there is tape that shows that the person did what the student claimed that they were doing, right? But for the most part, it has been exculpatory.
Right. So in that context, though, the point is that the site administrators should not really be monitoring the videos. It's after the fact.
Yeah, I definitely don't see us monitoring and using this tape for attendance type of issues. You know what I mean? It really is for security, for safety reasons. But I do think that in those instances where the teacher may be recorded doing something that is inappropriate, that it would definitely be used in those kinds of circumstances. That if there's an allegation that a student was abused in some way, shape, or form, and the camera showed that was the case, then they would be utilized. But on the flip side, and like I said before, prior, in most cases, it has actually done the exact opposite, where there's been an accusation and the tape doesn't prove that out.
Right.
So in any event, we, I think the position that we have on this right now is that the implementation of security cameras within our schools, is a management right. And so we're in the process right now of developing our policy as it relates to that. And then, of course, once we've implemented it, we'll be happy to sort of bargain the impact of the policy with you.
Right.
And on the surface, I don't see an issue with a lot of what you've listed here. It seems reasonable. So, we're not saying that these things won't happen. We're saying that we consider this to be a management right, and it's definitely something we'll be taking into consideration. And as we implement our policy, we'll be happy to talk to you about it.
So is there any policy in place now?
I refer to Wallace.
No.
So how's FERPA protected even aside from us? Because if you have all these students recorded on camera, right? So how do you protect their identity, showing different videos of different people? There's no policy.
Because FERPA is basically law, What the district does is just follow the law as it relates to that. So even though we do not have a policy per se, there are still student records that relates to policy, and those video recordings do become student records. So, right. So we have to follow those same things with FERPA, how we handle student records and the privacy things that are listed in FERPA,
Right.
we comply with.
And
Yes.
so if I made a public records request for video camera footage from one of their classrooms, let's say, you're gonna have to give me that, I guess, but with all the student faces redacted, blurred out
We would give you access to it,
to watch it.
to come watch it.
Right,
Yeah.
without redacting the student's face.
Yeah, if we couldn't redact the student's face, then we'd have to notify the other parents, students.
Right, so this is why I'm
That's why we follow the
surprised
law.
there's no policy already in place, because as I talked to you in the meeting some months ago, was that I said it was not a management right to have these cameras, and the Florida statute only carved out Broward County to start doing this with a ton of these kinds of policies in place for how to redact it and all this stuff, which is, yeah, what brought a lot of concern to us. So on what timeline will you have a policy together for that?
Well, we are planning to workshop the policy soon, of course, at that time. When we take it to the board, our intent, or we're planning within the next month or so to get that in front of the board. Of course, doing just the regular policy procedures, you all would have the opportunity to review that policy. The rulemaking process allows us 28 days for advertisement. And during that advertisement period, if there are any concerns or whatever, those things can be addressed with the district and the board.
How long is the video stored for?
We don't have a policy yet, so. it's yet to
I've
be determined.
emailed a list of questions to Brett, which I'm realizing there's no policy that outlines this yet. That was one of the questions. I can forward that. No, this is a great
As of
question.
today, is it stored for forever? Or does it just-
Is it stored locally? Is it stored in the cloud? How long is it stored for? I mean, there's a bunch of questions,
Right,
right? And this is
Right.
why Florida statute
Right.
base it off of that, I guess, is what
Right.
they're doing in Broward. But yeah, there's a lot to consider.
It's just-
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
It seems curious to me to implement the use of cameras before a policy and safeguards beyond FERPA are in place, and it almost seems like we're gonna end up having to backtrack problems after they occur and then set policies based on incidents that could happen. I think we might be setting ourselves up here for some trouble.
Well, no, I mean, I think what Wallace is saying is that we're following the law as it relates to use of cameras in our facilities. And so while we don't have a policy in place, in lieu of a policy, we're following the law. But we are in the process,
I guess
like you said, of
to
creating.
her point is if we were able to do it through this process and collaboratively, rather than a policy being dropped at a school board and having to react to it, that it would probably be best for us to try to head some things off before they become issues.
I understand. But I mean, I think that it boils down to, we really believe that this is a management right. If 447 allows us to exercise management rights where necessary. And so, that's one of the basic tenets of bargaining, right? Is that in issues where you have management rights, management doesn't have to bargain those issues. Not that we don't care what your contribution is, but it's in some instances we have the right, because it's in the best interest of the school board, to implement these things without bargaining.
I wish you would have said, yes, we can work collaboratively, because the way that it was explained, not that it was the intent, I think, but it becomes dismissive about the request to make sure that we head some things off before.
No. Well,
It's just.
you have
the
to
way that it
understand.
was- When you
Okay.
start stating statute and stuff and things like that, we're trying to work through a process that is brand new, that is to make sure that we're all on the same page and everybody understands how it's going to be implemented, because with no policy in place, there's no threshold even now as to which classroom gets a camera. It's just when we want to put a camera in a classroom. So like there shouldn't be arbitrary and capricious when we're putting these things, if the intent is for the issue of what we're talking about in terms of ESC, which was the tipping point, I think, from what the discussions that we had, that there were some issues that could be avoided long term.
So going back to my point was not to throw, obviously, I apologize if you felt like I was throwing the statute back at you. My point was simply to state that, this is something that we consider to be management rights. This is something that we clearly feel like we have the right to do, notwithstanding your concerns. Now, I do think that you guys have brought forward some good suggestions that we can definitely and will definitely take into consideration as we draft our policy, right? But in no way, shape, or form are we obligated, and that's the thing here, we're not obligated to bargain this. So we'll work with you on it. But if you go back to the conversation, the biggest limiting factor for us has been really cost. Because if you talk to the folks in safety and security, they'd like to have cameras everywhere so that we can ensure the safety and security of our students in every place on our district. So that's
So,
sort of the position.
Just
that
to
we're
say, our
taking.
position is it's not a management right, it's subject, mandatory or at worst permissive subject to bargaining. And that's been FEA's position for 10 plus years, as I understand. So this is really interesting. And that's really the point. And so, I'm glad you're gonna take this into consideration, but I think John Hunky already said in our meeting, just so you all know, is something like the district believes it's a greater liability to not have the cameras than to have them at this point. Because I think I said, we'll send you a C&D and are you gonna turn them off? What's the plan? Cease and desist. And he said, well, it's a bigger liability to turn them off, so do what you're gonna do. Pretty much is his attitude. So I think that's still the case. So, all right, we will.
Just for consideration as we're going forward with this, and I know I hear you guys saying, you're going to work on developing the policies, which will help provide clarity for everybody, right? Somebody I've spoken with over the years and a half, 2 years I've been on the bargaining team now, I can't remember who and specifically what was happening, but I know somebody has told me that in their site with cameras already, that their admin has been like watching them on these cameras and giving them constructive criticism or critiques based on whatever they see on the cameras. And I think that is a big concern for teachers, and is what Chris was saying and Scott was talking about already in a hypothetical situation, but that teachers have already received feedback in some capacity on wherever the cameras are, whether it's a classroom or the hallway, I don't know. But teachers have been getting that, at least at one site, because I know somebody told me that. So
You
that
mean
has-
what type of constructor, like you're not teaching that lesson plan correctly, or was it you're coming in late or you're something? What kind of feedback are you
I
talking
can't
about?
remember. And I'd have to look through my contacts to see. if
Yeah.
anybody told me
Well,
that.
it's okay.
but-
We talked about one where a teacher was coming in less than 5 minutes late a few times. The principal made a comment. My hot take is principals don't need access to this unless there's actually a critical emergency. Give them a red button. They can get camera access. They got to fill out a report why that happened. Otherwise, they don't need to be sitting there looking at cameras all day. That's kind of my attitude.
And to tack on to that, nothing replaces an administrator
Yeah.
coming
Yeah,
into the
of course,
classroom for
of
feedback
course.
for teachers. You can't get that, just as you can't understand tone through text. You can't understand tone and intent over a camera video.
So I think the bottom line is, we hear your concerns, we see your concerns. I don't think anyone thinks any of them necessarily are out of the realm of reasonableness, and, we will take that and obviously consider it.
All right.
Wallace,
Also, we already have current contract language about observations are supposed to be done openly and with the full knowledge of the employee. So that is already contract language. So if there are instances of those things, of course, let us know. Because that's already current contract language. Okay.
and the point is, if we're aware, we'll help, we'll rein this in, right? But
Sure.
what's happening in a one-off situation can't be applied as the rule across the district, right? And I think once again, once we have our policy in place and, we've been, as I indicated, we'll definitely take everything that you have stated here as recommendations and, take that into consideration when we're developing our policy. And then when it comes out, we'll see how it lands. And if you guys then at that point in time want to come back and impact bargain the policy, then we'll be open to that.
Yeah, the comment I forgot to mention earlier was that I think at the district level, John Hunkyard certainly has no time to be surveilling teachers this way. The problem, bug, or feature of this district is site-based decision-making. It's kind of out of all your control what the principal decides to do on a day-to-day basis, right? And that's where, like you're saying, with the one-offs and reeling them in, that's great. We'll point them out to you while it's talking about current contract language. That's helpful. So I do think at the district level, it's security. Site-based decision-making has turned that around a little bit. And so that's where our.
And I think we'll define those types of uses
Yeah.
within the parameters of the policy.
All right, for other, we have behavior stuff for 10 to talk about still. Did you responded to 10 with CCL, was that correct?
That's correct.
And
But like this, we'd like to hear your justifications. I know that you guys, we were sort of pressed up against the end time, the last time that we talked about 10. And so, we'll be happy to hear and consider any additional presentation, any additional information around 10 and reconsider that and come back and respond to that at the next meeting.
I don't know what individual, I mean, I can go over it again, but what was the no about all of this, I guess, to not take any of it was kind of our confusion.
So when we go back to the, a lot of the language that was here,
Doesn't cost anything.
true, but there were other concerns as it relates to,
It was the game.
as it relates to
We should make them cost more so you can
our
bring me down.
operations,
Okay,
right?
yeah.
And so, I'm not in a posture at this point in time to respond to each and every one of those things. But, there was consideration that a lot of this really infringes upon our ability to manage our sites, from a site-based perspective, right? And I think that that's really your intent is to take away a lot of that site-based autonomy. And that's just something that ultimately the district is got no appetite for at this point.
For clarity, we're not looking to take away site-based decision-making. What we're trying to do is create consistency so you can actually compare apples to apples. The issue is when every school is doing their own thing and you have a referral report at one school that says it's very high and another one where it's low, it doesn't really reflect always what the referrals were. When some school sites do things on paper and pencil and others actually document within the system so that it's known. If we're actually talking about safety and security and we really care about it, there should be a consistency to go ahead and see if there are any patterns district-wide that we need to be aware of so that we can address them, because that may be a counseling need of that student, could be some kind of additional supports, but we don't know that if what we're trying to do is manage numbers to the public. What the teachers want, the staff, is to know that when there's an issue in the classroom, that it's not going to be, and this is just an off example, that I lived through myself. The kid goes down, plays cards with the AP, gets a lollipops and back to my room in 30 minutes. That's not behavior management that supports classroom learning. And it's not fair to the other students in that room that go ahead and don't have some kind of consistency to allow them to learn. So as much as it may be considered a site-based decision or going after it, that's not what the purpose of this is.
I think that in our discussion, we really felt like the language that was present within 10.05 related to classroom discipline and control was sufficient without adding all of the additional obligations for each site. That was the primary concern, but I mean, we're open to listening and reconsidering that stance. I do think also you go back to some of the, go up to C under 10.02 C, and your establishment that says no derogatory materials related to work performance or other matters will be recorded without just cause. I mean, just cause is a very high standard to uphold. Just cause isn't just some sort of phrase that you throw around lightly. There's
Yeah.
seven steps
the point.
to justify just cause, and we do not agree that just we should have to establish just cause just to be able to document when there's been a performance issue in the classroom. I mean,
Is it a real performance issue if it doesn't meet just cause?
well, there's
Regardless of recording it, if a principal wants to put a derogatory comment in a teacher's file, there should be just morally, right, the metrics of just cause there, that they have done any investigation, right? How has the teacher done all these kinds of things? And so that's where this comes from, is that we don't think that's such a high bar to use these kind of common sense type things that this actually happened.
I would argue that to establish just cause is a very high bar, and that really you shouldn't have to meet just cause in order to document an instance. If I wanted to take a derogatory action against you as a teacher, to discipline you or to give you a substantive performance rating, then yeah, there should be just cause. But for me to make a notation in your file that I had to coach you on an issue, that should not require just cause.
So yeah, the
I
issue is
would argue that standard far surpasses any standard of the like anywhere out there. I mean, I've never heard it.
yeah, the site-based decisions that are made here are beyond what happens in other districts. So we have extra language in here to account for that, but there are too many principles here that use evaluative components kind of negatively. And that's the issue, is there's just no control over that essentially because of what you're saying. They don't have any just cause requirements. They could put any comment they want in there. They're not holding to any standard of truth or evidence or whatever, because it's not disciplinary, right? It's just a comment. That goes in their file, that creates morale issues. As teachers are allowed to talk about their wages and conditions of employment, that would include evaluations, by the way. So it's just a situation where, and maybe you can talk to your principals about it, but they need to be able to back up what they're putting in there. That's not unreasonable. Is that unreasonable to ask them to back it up? Forget just cause. Can we say, show us evidence of this? Is that a reasonable bar to set? Anything? Or do we just, they said it, we're done? We believe them. That's my question.
I mean, I get what you're saying in terms of there should be some substantiation that what occurred.
Evidentiary
Right?
basis.
Right.
Yeah.
But you and I both know that every circumstance does not meet that standard, and there's a reason why. So if we had the ability to justify every action with every documentation with just cause, well, then why would it then become just a documentation? You know what I mean? It's very if at that point in time we could take disciplinary action on that basis. But that's in many cases we're not going to that level because what we're trying to do is head off additional issues. And so in most cases, when you put something in there into a file that's non-evaluative, the whole purpose is just to say, hey, heads up,
Right.
don't do this again. Okay. It's not evaluative, but don't do this again. But to also have documentation in the file so that if that does happen again, if that person goes out and does the exact same thing again, it can be.
Oh yeah, I think we're on the
Right?
exact same page.
So-
The problem is when they put that in there and there's no evidence they did the thing, the employee says they didn't do the thing, no one corroborates it, and that just sits in there as an idle threat. That's when it becomes a problem.
I would agree with you that it shouldn't sit in there as an idle threat. what I would contend is that it sits in there simply as a coaching moment that then, because it's non-evaluative, goes away at some point in time because it's never turned into something that is actionable. You know,
Does it
something
go
that is,
away if it's put in the evaluation system, even if it's not evaluated? Or is that a public record
Public record,
document
right.
that
it's
lives?
What is shown on the summative score for that teacher at the end of the school year? Those additional comments that were non-evaluative, they are not populated on that form. So if a teacher were to request their final evaluation score or that document at the end of the year, it would not be on the printout because of the fact that it is non-evaluative. To Brett's point that he was making.
right. And I think the very first, you know, this is just another example, and we can. I mean, I get where you're coming from on this. It's just, you know, just cause is just a very high standard, and so we don't have any appetite for putting that standard into our contract at this point. So part of coaching in many cases is to say, hey, this isn't, you can't do this.
Right.
You know, so the very first step of just cause is notice, right? So if your notice is that opportunity to sit down and say, hey, you can't do this. Well, we would never be able to put that into the file because you never established notice, right? So the bottom line is sometimes that conversation is, and it going into the file as documentation is what establishes notice for the purpose of just cause, right? So then you go through, and I always say that, so the bar for just cause is substantial. That being the case, we should be able to document an employee in a non-evaluative fashion to just provide the notice that this doesn't need to happen again, and then move forward. And that's why we can't establish just cause as it relates to this. And that's why we went back and said current contract language is just fine.
Understandable that there are some concerns on your side about just cause and what level that is. The part that is not received well is that just current contract language, knowing that there is a need for it by the staff. Meaning, if there's a need, then why can't we throw the language up there and hash out what is a reasonable compromise to go ahead and make sure we're all speaking the same language, have the same threshold, that there is a level of requirement before something is documented. It's not just, I heard a student say something, you know, or what happens sometimes in our schools is another teacher comes with some information and it's treated as the gospel rather than what's the situation and who's involved. So there is an issue and we are looking for a solution to that issue. To just say current contract language is dismissive to the need of the staff in this particular situation. We're trying to figure out how do we move forward.
So, all right, we'll take that into consideration.
So another component, if you look at 10.05D, referrals shall not be written under another employee's name or modified by anyone other than the employee. That seems reasonable. So I mean, that seems reasonable. So why was that? And I guess why is there no appetite for that? Because the staff has an issue of referrals being written by admins or modified by others, and they may not even be notified that happened. And so we're trying to stop that, since if their name should be attached to the referral if they're the one writing it, or not if they're not the one writing it. And so this is why to just reject everything wholesale, and there's some things in here, I mean, I just don't. That's what leads people to believe there was not a thorough investigation, when that just seems reasonable, cost nothing, maybe implemented widely everywhere already.
Sure. Well, I think that one thing is, you know, in some sense, a lot of these things, there's no problem with them now. And to establish within contract, the ability to grieve an issue that doesn't present an issue and only presents additional liability for the district is the main reason why we don't want to implement some of this stuff.
So
So
liability.
well, additional liability associated, meaning not necessarily the liability of the common sense, but liability that eventually we may end up going to arbitration over something that is really an unneeded piece of language within the contract. And so,
Right.
but going back to what we talked about before, you know, we're reopening this issue. We're here to hear what you have to say as it relates to it. We'll, you know, that may very well be something they're willing to do. Sit down and say, okay, well, if not this, well, what? You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
what's reasonable? But it's got to really, you know, you've got to understand that in some cases it's just a no.
Yeah.
We're not open to that. And in other cases, we may be open to some iteration of that, but as it stands, we're not open to the iteration that you've proposed.
Sure. So as bargaining, counter proposals are accepted.
As you're talking about liability and responsibility, I would think if you're trying to follow a chain of what happened in a situation, and I wrote something and it's timestamped and it has my name attached to it, and then somebody else comes in and also writes something and it's timestamped and it has their name on it, that gives you an investigatory understanding of what's happened. But if I write something and it's timestamped with my name on it, and then it's changed, but it doesn't change to that person's name, it's as if I wrote it, which means I am now held responsible for what it says that has my timestamp on it. So I think that that's part of the concern.
Some other concerns with the focus and the referral procedure is the lack of access to a referral once it's been processed or put in. For example, we work at the same school, we could be teaching the same student, she writes a referral. I can see in the system that student A is suspended for X number of days. I can't see why, I can't see what happened, can't see anything. And just in the nature of the classes that I teach, that's important for me to know, because they're, you know, going to work every day. Hypothetically, I have to put documentation in their files that says student A got suspended for X, Y, and Z, cannot go to work for a number of days. And so there's a discrepancy of, it was being filed one way a few years ago, now they're disappearing, you can't see the letters or how it's going down outside of what you put in. Or another thing that we're seeing happen, I mean, at a site as large as ours, is a referral takes a long time to process. And, you know, the major ones, they get handled right away because they're a major incident. But then these minor ones that we're constantly writing for attendance issues, or, you know, things that need lunch detention and so on, I could write the referral on a Wednesday. It might not be handled till the next Wednesday after that because they're so far behind. And now that kid is sat in my classroom for 2 days on a minor issue. And then a week later, like, Ms. Weston, you wrote me up. There was this, it's like, well, you knew that you were late and it just didn't get handled until a week later. So we're seeing, you know, that repercussive action of delayed referral time. So that's why we put in there within 24 hours. Maybe the time's amenable, but there needs to be a time frame that they have to be handled in order for them to be an effective referral, to be accurately, you know, disciplined for an action that took place. If I'm disciplined a week later, I'm thinking I got away with it. So that's kind of the discrepancy there with the focus is it's all going in digitally, but then it kind of disappears and there's some holes in the way we can all see it at our sites.
Just similar to the first point Pam made, it's like if the student was suspended or has OFI or something like that, like she said, you can only see in focus a letter code. That's it. You know, you have no idea why they're gone. You can just see how many days they're supposed to be gone. So if they're out for something that could be a safety issue, if you are a teacher of that student, I think you should be aware of what happened. So when they return, you can kind of be aware of what's going on, so you can make sure that your classroom is in a safe position. But we get nothing. It's just, and it varies, like you said, from year to year. There was a time where before you get emails that this person is suspended for this reason. If you were a teacher of that student, that doesn't happen. And then even with stability, like secretary, we're currently without a secretary in the office that handles all that right now. Don't know if it'll be filled by next week. But that has changed and shifted throughout the years, and the way that that's the candle has changed and shifted, and that's just one cycle. So having that consistency, being aware, all that, and then if a student transfers, it doesn't come with them, like we can't see anything. We don't-
If it's
we don't
not
know
all
what happened.
documented the same, and
That's important, not that it would, I think that there's maybe an overarching worry that it would cloud our judgment of a student that enters in, but if I know that student A has had certain behavioral problems, well, maybe that's something I can, okay, well, we're gonna sit you here, we're gonna do this, this, and this, and then all that's avoided rather than
Have to
backtracking.
relearn it.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Well, I think what we're clear about is that, we obviously support our teachers and their ability to take disciplinary action against the students as necessary, right? What we don't necessarily want is to have to memorialize it in contract and, make it an obligation that every school do this the exact same way. Because once again, this is something that I know we disagree, right? But we have embraced as a district site-based decision making and to implement the language as has been proposed would be to go away from site-based decision making as it relates to discipline. We felt like the language that says, the language in 10.05 clearly establishes that the district agrees to give support and assistance to employees with respect to control and discipline within their classroom. It's a more generalized statement. We understand, right? The district additionally agrees to provide a written statement governing the use of punishment of students to all employees no later than the first week of the school year. In keeping with those guidelines, an employee may impose customary classroom discipline where necessary. We just don't feel the need to outline it to the level of specificity that you proposed. So that's why we felt like current contract language suffices. Now, we would be open to maybe work grouping this and working through an approach that maintains site-based decision-making, right? But maybe does provide for a little bit more detail, sort of like a happy medium, if you will. But, as it's been proposed, once again, it's not something that we are willing to agree to.
So you have at least one site that does this just all on paper. We learned the last bargaining session. So that's their site decision to make. That's still the position of the district. You don't even want electronically, they could go back to like tablets and chisels and that's all good. Like, is there any limitation to how they're going to keep records, or that's what you're saying? It's a site-based decision.
We're saying it's a site-based decision. Is
Is
that a best practice? No, it's not a best practice.
As
But-
we do
but
best practice in
you
the
also-
classroom, that's what we're asking is these are the best practices that we've agreed upon that would allow us to do our job and be aware of things that are going on. And that timely response, right? If you're gonna go ahead and have a relationship with someone and you're gonna try and go ahead and coach them up, whether it's behavior or otherwise, to have a week delay for something to come back and put a teacher in that position is just not best
So what's
practice.
the resolution in that? You guys file agreements because it didn't get handled within 6 days? There's no win situation.
I think it's the idea of we come to an agreement of what the reason is for why this is important. Like Stanley said, to be clear is to be kind. We want to be clear to everyone what the process is and what should be happening in our schools.
Yeah.
That's pretty much what the issue is right now, so that there isn't. I talked to a teacher from another school. Yeah, I got a kid that, had a fake gun in the classroom, something went off and everything. Nothing happened. Over another one, completely different situation and how it's handled at school. It's not fair to the students to have an inconsistent work environment. It's not fair to the teachers to have an inconsistent work environment. The issue of the contract is to create continuity that regardless of where Martina works, she has similar working conditions as someone that's at another school. So if we are going to say that the contract is built on site-based decision-making, then that undermines the intent of what the contract is. So what we're asking is, we've got to figure out how to move forward, not just from a no standpoint.
It undermines the intent from your perspective. I think that our district has always embraced the idea of site-based decision making, and that the specifics of instances matter, right? And that if you have a one-size-fits-all approach, there's a lot of collateral damage that happens to students, to teachers. You know, that swings both ways. And so it's our intent when we wrote this language to provide for flexibility. And like I said, we're open to looking at it and maybe agreeing to some additional language, as long as it maintains that intent, that flexibility that is required from our perspective.
So we're going to make salary site-based decision-making too? I mean, if we're site-based, then that means the principal should be able to offer somebody else $1,000 more because they really want to go ahead and give them more money, and I'm a site-based, so I can do that. It's the same issue.
I know you're going for a point. That's fine.
No, it's not a point. It's just,
I mean,
that's the purpose
I
of
get
the
what you're saying,
contract.
but I mean,
I think fundamentally, collective bargaining agreements and site-based decision-making are at odds with each other.
agree.
Because the CBA is a large umbrella, right?
but I mean, it's clear that we've written this language to ensure, you know, that, and with the, so may have been different leaders from the LCTA side of the house, different leaders from the LCS side of the house, but the language was written mutually, you know, we agreed at some point in time, and that language ensures flexibility as it's currently written, which is what we value. And that's the reason why we like we like this current contract. But that being the case, I'll lay it out there again. We'll be happy. We're happy to put together a work group and look at this issue.
Can I just add one thing quickly? Just a little bit ago, Brett, you had mentioned with some of the language in 10 that you guys didn't see it as a problem, so we didn't need to add that language. And that's sort of been stuck on repeat in my mind. I understand from your perspective, from the district's perspective, you may not see those concerns. The language we've written as a bargaining team with our member input, with input from the bargaining unit, maybe you guys aren't seeing it on your end as a problem, but we're putting in so many hours to refine and clarify and get our language as concise as possible, because we feel that there are issues at the sites that are not being addressed and need more consistency throughout the district through our CBA. There's like, you know, and the language that's in the contract now, maybe that was written a really long time ago and maybe we need to update it. And we're taking the time to come and present you guys with language that we think is really important. And if it's always current contract language, if it's always this, if it's always managerial right, you know, it feels like we could work together, we could collaborate and make improvements for our students. The issues we're bringing forward, yes, they impact teacher working conditions, but it's for the students at the end of the day. SLP caseload, student issue, right? You guys know that. I know you know that, but I'm not feeling if it's saying we don't see a problem, but we're telling you there's a problem and we're living it. So I feel like that needs to maybe be considered a little bit more, because we're very thoughtful in the language we're presenting. It's not just for fun. We don't want to spend our whole summer drafting contract language. There's a reason why we're putting in the time to do it, because we see issues that need to move forward. And we know we can collaborate to improve things, but it's a give and take, right?
I think some of this stuff in 10, specifically 10.05, where we're talking about the use of focus. I mean, the use of focus is district-wide. That's a mandatory thing. We have to put our grades into focus. We have to use focus where all of our student contact information is. If focus is district-wide, for the use of all of that, it should be something that can be district-wide for the use of discipline and put in disciplinary things. And that's something that it may be in our world, we're seeing as a simple solution because we're already all using focus. It's not like Leon's the only school site using focus and then another school site using a different system, Pinnacle. And we're like, okay, well, jump on board with focus because it's working really well. Everyone in the district's using it. And so I think that this is something that we could use to streamline And maybe the referrals that are written on paper have to get accurately documented or scanned into Focus additionally. You know, okay, if you know, a school wants to use paper referrals, then it's somebody's job to then scan all those paper referrals into the appropriate student's system in
Yeah,
Focus.
you're speaking about a specific instance that I don't know that anyone on this team right now has any knowledge of. And so we would definitely look into that matter. I mean, for all intents and purposes, the system is set up to track these disciplinary actions, you know, the referrals. And, you know, if I can't speak to whether or not that is or is not happening, whether or not there is someone, if they're using paper, are they entering it into Focus? I don't know. But the bottom line is there is room for some work on this. We're willing to work with you on it, but you have to understand that, you know, we value flexibility within our district. And so when it boils down to taking away that flexibility, it's not something that we're going to agree to. And so, and the bottom line is all of this language was negotiated, has been agreed upon in the past. So it's not our goal to rewrite the book each year. And in some cases, you know, the district has given up significant concessions to gain language that you guys don't like now, but you don't really take into consideration the fact that those agreements may have come at a cost in the past, right? Just like things that we've agreed to that you guys have really wanted, right? You guys have had to give up significant language in order to get to those things. And so for us to decide that, for it to be sort of intimated that we're not open, in some cases, we're not open. You're correct, because we've given consideration to get to where we are. And we like where we are because we feel like it works for the district. But that being the case, we are always open to talking about it and hearing your perspective. And, you know, this is a give and take. It has to be taken into consideration that there's been a lot of giving in the past, a lot of taking in the past to get to the language that we're currently at.
I have a couple of hopefully quick points. One, we come together to bargain to adjust language to meet the needs as we grow and change as a district. Okay, so language is going to change. What was written in the contract 15 years ago may not be applicable today, and that's why we make the changes. That's why we come together. That's the whole purpose of bargaining, trying to find those compromises that work for everybody. Second of all, site-based decision-making is always something that we have supported and encouraged. However, it's site-based decision-making should happen in a way to support what's in the contract, not to take the place of what's in the contract.
Yeah,
And
obviously.
it's to come together, to interpret together, to get clarification, and to work within the confines of what's written in the contract. And then the last point I want to make is, and this has been brought up many, many times at the superintendent's town hall meetings, on the news, everywhere you look across this state, discipline has been a major, major concern, more so now than it has ever been before. And teachers are looking to hear more than, and I hear what you're saying. I do. They're looking to hear more than current contract language. They are looking for movement that shows that we are coming together to address the current needs of the current discipline problems that we are having. And to make sure that there was a certain baseline filter that we're using to help all of our children across the district and across the state. I know we don't have influence across the state, but you know, as things go in Tallahassee, things go across the state in a lot of different ways. So we are really being looked at to set the standard here for what's acceptable and not acceptable in our classrooms. And I think we can do better. And I don't think we are. And current contract language is, frankly, I'm sorry, hurts feelings.
Let me reiterate what I've said many times at this point in time. We are open to having a work group that can look at this language. I mean,
Year
that's,
starts in just a couple of weeks.
I mean, I understand, but I mean, this is an ongoing process. You know what I mean? And so we're open to talking about it. And you know, the key is I get where you're coming from, and you don't have to continue to make the point to me because I understand there's a need, and I understand that you don't necessarily like current contract language, right? But what I need you to understand is we're willing to work on it, but we do value the flexibility. And so those two values have to be balanced against each other. Okay, so we can get there. How about this? We'll put together people that can be on the group from our perspective. You put together people that can be on the group from your perspective, and we'll schedule a meeting. Yes, go ahead.
And I think, I'm coming new to the group, so thank y'all. Appreciate it. But I think with me being now part of that elementary school management side, maybe there's some things that we can do to kind of help start moving in a different direction, so we can work together with the school-based administrators or with our group coming together to kind of figure out what's going to be the best course of action. So I think we can kind of start looking at moving forwards that way to see what we can do and to kind of bring that perspective that I'm coming right out of the school too, that I'm still kind of fresh and new. My feet are still I'm still a principal, to kind of move forward to see what we can do to kind of bring all that together.
I mean, the main thing is, that I know that you may not see it, but we want to work together on this issue. Okay, so put that to bed. Let's schedule the meetings. Let's do it. We've got 30 minutes left at this point in time.
For 8, same explanations, I'm guessing, as to all the rejections, reduced flexibility, cost money. Summarize the district's perspective on
Yes.
that. So again, it's a matter of movement in any direction. So in principle, just don't want to hear any of it.
No, I think that the majority of 8 was simply that all of them, not all of them, many of the items that were brought forward came with additional costs, right? That were much more significant than what we can afford at this point in time.
So. for those in the
Let me
room-
just summarize, for the group, we're talking about Article 8 previously, all of the ESC service provider language, talking about caseload limitations. It's like a lot of. Go ahead, Sarah.
So I understand the financial side of things. Does the district recognize and acknowledge that class size for gen ed teachers is an issue and that caseload size for ESC service providers, SLP, OTPT, program specialists for compliance, program specialists for behavior, that is an issue? Does the district recognize and acknowledge that is an issue?
Yeah, I believe that we've indicated that in the past, and we're not claiming that the circumstances are ideal, right?
It's
Well,
less than ideal.
Isn't that what I just said?
It's like ideal
Well,
here.
I said we're not saying that those conditions are
I know.
ideal, which would be less than ideal. So yes, yes, the answer is.
So, and I think Chris kind of touched on this too, but, I think there could be opportunities within all of this new language we proposed to you guys that you guys could counter. Instead of a flat rejection, you could say, okay, we can't do this financial thing, but maybe we can approach it this way for right now with the goal of, maybe having a financial stipend if the caseload is exceeded. There's just nothing.
But
And it is a
the
student
majority-
issue though.
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting.
That's okay. Brett.
The majority of the reason for the denial is because each and every one of those things was tied to paid at the hourly rate or an additional stipend back. And all of those things, that's money that we don't have dedicated to that particular category of expenses right now. And so our emphasis, we've put forward, and we've talked about this, we've put forward a financial package that we've tried to provide the most incentive, the best possible financial package for our teachers on this hand. And really all of the proposals that you've put forth apply to a very broad, 2,050 teachers across the board. And so that the amount that each one of those nickels and dimes that comes with the individual language far exceeds what we've put forward over here. And we've already indicated, we'd love to put forward more over here, but we just don't have the money, you know? So where are we gonna get the money for all of this additional? That's the primary reason. And, you know, we're happy to look at it, but I think the greater good is that the majority of the teachers are looking for, you know, for an increase in their paycheck, as opposed to certain individual groups within the unit getting compensated additional amounts for work as part of their job.
So that's not what the compensation is. It's not saying I need more money because this is my job and I'm working so hard. That's not what it is. The proposed caseload caps is because the student needs are not being met currently, and we are overextended. We cannot do our professional job that's asked of us. We cannot do all the parts. It's impossible, right? Unless we're working off the clock 5 hours extra every day sometimes, right? My first 2 years here, crying every day, working 4 to 5 hours extra every day, and I still could not keep up because the caseload was so high. So I have to decide, what am I not gonna do, right? You have to decide, but there are things that I still need to do, but I have to.
One would
decide what to
argue,
do.
well, never mind. No.
But so I think it, like you talked about, you know, and I don't know if maybe if you guys can reflect and if you'll come with a counter at some point. But in terms of a work group, how you proposed for the discipline, having a work group, I've asked a couple of times now directly to the superintendent and the school board to have a private discussion with service providers so we can say, this is what we're facing day to day. We need to be able to share that information with you guys, with the superintendent, with the school board in that kind of setting. And to my knowledge, that hasn't been arranged at all yet. I think there would be a lot of people willing to have those open and really honest discussions with you guys.
Well, I would also argue that, I mean, your situation, while understandable, you know, I mean, I understand your concern. It's not all that unique in that there are AP English teachers that are spending just as many hours grading papers outside of their normal school hours as you are. And so, I mean, the problem is, I don't know that you can individually address the challenges of each individual groups. I mean, each individual group. So yes, we can look at that. We'll be happy to get together and look at it. But I don't know how you weigh it against all the other teachers that have their own individual challenges. It may not be IEPs, it may not be caseload, right? But it may be that the unique aspects of their job, each individual has a level of effort that goes above and beyond, you know, what they feel like is should be, right? And we acknowledge that that's the case at times, right? But I mean, it comes along with being the profession, right?
So I'll just say that as a representative body, we address the problems that are brought to us. And so we know most teachers are working a ton of hours, right? It's for the students here. When 50 AP Lit teachers show up and start emailing us, yo, there's these new standards, we're like working 7 hours extra day per year. Yeah, we're gonna be at the table proposing language for that. What we don't have that right now. What we have is the ESE service providers saying we're at the edge. That's what we have right now, and that's the difference.
So what we would be happy to do, like much like we've done with the discipline issue, we'll be happy to sit down and work through it.
I caution about the sitting down and the talking, because we've sat down and talked about a number of issues that talk never leads to action. There's articles in here that have been cleaned up that were about looking at contact time for high school back in 2017, 2018. And there was never one meeting that took place. So my point is, this is the spot where we work through those things. We negotiate and we have conversation with a real counter from LCS that says, this is where we think the mark is.
Our counter right now is that we're
allows us
happy
to
with
go
the current
ahead.
contract. That's
Okay.
where- as it relates to this issue.
Right. I understand that. And what the superintendent needs to realize is that as he talks about safety and then morale being number 2, these are issues that impact morale. And that's why at the end of the day,
Scott, where do you propose that we get the additional money? I know that you guys think that we have all of this money that we have access to.
There were things that were not money that.
But it just doesn't exist. We've had this conversation with you on more than one occasion. If we had the money to spend on that particular item, I don't think there will be any ill will towards fixing the caseloads and towards giving the teachers everything that they deserve. But the reality is we have a limited number of resources, right? And what we're trying to do is give the teachers as much as we possibly can, but we can't split that any more than it's already been split. And so what we've said is we understand that that's a challenge. We're willing to look at ways, but we can't guarantee that there's any better way to do it than what we've got right now, considering the resources that are at our fingertips.
Can I just add one point about, like, I know Sarah talked about caseload caps from her standpoint, but from being a core teacher and talking about class load, class sizes and things of that sort. Like, we have teachers who are in positions where they have more than 3 preps. And sometimes they're teaching more than 1 prep within the same period. It makes it extremely difficult. We're not saying that's happening with every teacher. And what we're really, really asking for is, can we help solve the problem?
Yes.
And if the problem
Well,
can't be solved, then could there be compensation? We're not asking for compensation initially. Same thing, there could be several teachers that are teaching the exact same course. One may have 30 kids,
Mhm.
and the next one may have 15. Like, that's just not, that's, why can't there be more of a push to just even that out a little bit? Like, that doesn't require money, that just requires some shifting. Maybe some students might not be as happy with the schedule changes or something, but there's not as much, like, the goal wasn't to say, pay us, pay us, pay us. The goal was, let's fix this, let's talk about it. And if it can't be fixed because there's not enough people here to teach, or, this is just one of those years where then let's talk about other ways where somebody can be compensated.
Yeah, by all means, I think that those are the things when I propose a work group to look at these items. I mean, I think that's the way we address those types of issues, right? The bottom line is, and the reason why those work groups haven't really come to fruition in the past is because there's really hasn't been an appetite to look at those things that don't cost us additional money. So the limiting factor on a lot of this, because we have made it a priority to, when money's available, we give it to teachers in their paychecks. You know what I mean? So those things haven't come to fruition as a result of these meetings, primarily because it's a resource limitation. So that said, I mean, we'll leave it on the table. We're happy to look at options and ways that we may be able to get there, utilizing resources and not utilizing resources. But at some point, you have to say, okay, what's more important? What we're giving to teachers in their paychecks, or what we're doing for the special area group over here to deal with the amount of caseload that they're dealing with, right? So if you want to take some of this money over here and put it towards here, we're open to that. But I think that the only way that we can really get to a point where we maybe have something that's workable is for us to continue to hash it out in a place where people sort of understand what the realities are.
So who on your side do you think would be in that group for the ESE caseload provider stuff?
I'd have to work through. I mean, I think that it starts with our ESE department, right? Kathy Shields and other members of our bargaining team would be also on that, as well. But like I said, these are things. If you want to dig more deep, and we have some time right now with regard to 8 and 10, right? We can spend some time digging into it. All right. So
Do you want me to do my last short thing real quick?
Yeah,
Or- So LCCA, we're
we have
presenting.
15 minutes.
Yeah, so we've, I think, mutually agreed to open up this additional article 22.03, which is just to take the LCTA dues and assess them on the same salary basis like we've done with the other health benefits. So now it just says Instead of 1/10 of the annual dues, they're gonna deduct based upon the payment base of the employee. So if you're a 12-month employee, you get 12 LCTA dues deductions. If you're 10-month, you get 10.
I don't anticipate that being an issue.
So,
And so let me confirm with our payroll department and ensure that's not gonna be an issue, and then we'll be happy to TA on that next week,
sounds good.
whenever we meet again. Look, we agreed.
We did it.
Oh, yeah.
I know.
Meeting adjourned.
So,
That's accomplished.
So
with that in mind, we want to talk about, this is not a proposal, this is a presentation of 13 as we see it moving forward. As you guys are aware, the law changed recently, and evaluations are no longer the subject of bargaining. All right. So what we've essentially done is outlined within, we're putting forward contract language that sort of outlines the procedural aspects. I'm going to have Wallace Knight cover it.
Okay, basically, in front of you, you have Article 13, employee evaluations. To emphasize the point that Brett just made, it is considered to be a management right now. And basically, I know even some of the points that were made today as we were discussing other things. We have outlined in this article how the district feels we should move forward considering what the legislative changes are. We understand how evaluations are extremely important because they provide the performance appraisals. It usually is used for support of the staff. So we get it. And we know that it's still something very important, and from time to time, input will definitely be needed from your unit. I think under 13.01A basically sums this up very clearly, in my opinion. In compliance with the mandates of Florida statute regarding evaluations of instructional personnel performance, evaluation shall be based on a combination of the instructional practice and professional responsibility score and the student performance to create a summative score. In essence, we are following, the district will follow section 1012.34 of Florida statute that governs how we conduct and perform our evaluations. So many of those procedural things, just to rest assured, it's not something that we're just randomly doing. We are still required by law to do certain things as it relates to evaluations, okay? Also, I wanted to go to that point as well, because we discussed it earlier, about all observations of employees for the purposes of evaluation shall be conducted openly and with the full knowledge of the employee. I just want to emphasize that because I know that is a concern that we continue to hear. So after you all review this document as well, of course, everything we will consider thoughtfully moving forward. Moving along, because they're sort of in the same vein, Article 26, the Teacher Evaluation Review Committee was a partnership, collaboration between LCS and LCTA. That committee, because of the change in the law, we're striking through that because of the sheer nature of the function of that committee. Again, any counters, we are open to ideas of collaboration. Are there any questions?
So you're saying that the TER committee is now even a legal committee? Is that what you're saying, more or less?
Not really.
No, no.
Okay. So,
In some, basically, some of the functions of the TURC committee was to provide recommendations for bargaining purposes. And since bargaining is now a management right, well, evaluations is a management right, some of the functions of that TURC committee are no longer needed.
So in terms of Turk, most of the work was done during the course of the year. It wasn't a negotiation piece. It was more of a tweaking of the process from the perspective of the employees as well as the district with the principals and everything. I don't think any contract language has been changed based off Turk. It's just more the evaluation system was refined. And so just so that we understand, the superintendent does not want to engage in those conversations with staff and his staff to have those conversations moving forward.
No, that is not what we're saying. Right now, this is the stance of the district. We're choosing right now to, because of the bargaining component that was associated with TURC, to strike through that language. Of course, if there is another way that that can be reimagined, the thoughts of that, we are welcome to your ideas.
so, okay, so I think it's that, because they're gonna make suggestions to the collaborative bargaining team, which has no power because
Correct.
evaluations are management. rights.
Correct.
But just like the benefits committee, it could still stay in there if it didn't have necessarily a bargaining component, because benefits committee, even though they meet, there's still bargaining that takes place on.
I think that's what Wallace is saying, is that it was reimagined in a way that removes that component, so that it's all kosher.
We're not saying in any way, shape, or form that you know, we are dead set against Turk. It's
Correct,
not gonna
right.
happen, right? What we're saying is Turk as it currently exists, you know, is not, it needs to be reimagined. It needs to be, if it is to exist, we need to find what its real purpose is.
Yeah,
And
I'm
there,
gonna
you know,
have
we do
a-
recognize that there are some aspects of Turk, you know, being a review committee
Yes.
that have value, right? But that needs, you know, that needs to be part of the conversation.
Okay. So for a crucial conversation, to be direct about this, if it's the intent that the district is not necessarily opposed, but all you do is strike it out, then it looks as on paper that you don't want to have anything to do with it. If there was a possibility within your realm of what you saw it look like, then that would be the language that would have been appreciated to be presented rather than just strike out.
From our perspective, we don't necessarily see a role for Turk at this point in time. We recognize the fact that you may see a role for Turk, and if you want to propose what that role is, then counters are accepted. All right. So let's get together again in a couple. I think a couple of weeks would be ideal. I do want to have the opportunity for us to talk through these work groups. I get that in the past we've had work groups that haven't necessarily been the most fruitful, but I think if we all sort of keep an eye to the things that make this fruitful is we've got to understand the values that are being brought to the table. With us, it's flexibility. So as long as we can maintain the flexibility associated with some of the stuff from 10, then I think that we can make some ground, right? And so on and so forth about 8. I think that once again, if we have to keep an eye towards resources, because resources are the limiting factor as it relates to what we do on 8. So if we find ways that find ways to address the concerns that do not directly tie to an obligation on the side of the district to pay additional funds or to pay additional hourly rates, those types of things, then I think we're much more likely to land in a spot that we're able to do some good even if it's just incremental.
It's hard to understand what mark that is when it can't cost anything and it has to be flexible. And it has to reduce the liability of the district. That really makes a target that's so
This is
small.
hard work.
You made a comment earlier
This is
about,
hard work.
well, if the
It's not-
referrals
it's-
aren't processed within 6 days, you're gonna file a grievance and then what? And so to your point is charge you money for not following the rules, right? And so otherwise, what's the enforcement mechanism, right? But something's got to move somewhere.
So but at the same time, why would we ever agree to be charged money if we don't have the money to pay? So that's part of bargaining. There's
Right,
there's no way that we're going to do that. So if we can find some sort of alternative to something we're absolutely never going to agree to,
Follow
that
the
works.
rules. The alternative is to just follow the language and you never instigate that.
we're happy to follow the language as it's currently written and as we've agreed to.
Yes, and I understand.
But if we want to start making additions, you got to understand that it's got to be a win-win situation. So, thank you guys, appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, well, still got extra copies. Can I have those copies?
Yeah, in terms of next date, you're gonna work with Chris on figuring out when we
Yeah.
come back and when the committee meets and all that other stuff.
Yeah, I think if we can get together I'm out next week. If you want to get together tomorrow to discuss, or we can